No, I'm not having that.
I just think we live in a cynical world, Gab, and money talks.
You're sounding like Uncle Bryn there, Simon.
He jumped from Colchester fairly quickly.
No, but that's different.
You can't say no to that. That is an objective fact. He jumped from Colchester very quickly.
All right, I'm not arguing. I'm not disputing the facts, but I think.
Hello guys and welcome to this week's episode of The Sportsman Untitled. I'm delighted to be joined by Gab Sutton and Benjamin Bloom this week. We're going to have a look back at some of the FA Cup action. We're going to discuss a bit of the managerial mayhem that's going on in the Championship at the moment. I'm going to look ahead to some massive fixtures upcoming in the Championship. But Gab, welcome back to the show. How are you doing? Let's start with the FA Cup. I mean, Plymouth's win at Brentford from a shock perspective is probably where we have to start, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You look at this Brentford side who have got all their points in the Premier League at home, and you've got Plymouth Argyle who've got none of their points in the Championship, where they're bottom of the table away from home, and yet Plymouth Argyle go there and win. And what I loved was the reaction at full time of Kevin Nanscoville, who's stepped in not for the first time as caretaker manager and done a brilliant job alongside Joe Edwards, and you could see that raw passion and emotion and feeling for the club that he had at full time. He was almost falling over. He was so sort of animated. So that was a lovely moment. But I think the big thing that I would take away is the performance of Morgan Whittaker for Plymouth Argyle.
Is the transfer window open, Gab?
Yes, yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see whether Plymouth Argyle can keep hold of him, or whether, do they sell him for 12 million and actually use that for a recruitment drive and revamp their squad a little bit.
And Plymouth now obviously sacked Wayne Rooney, turning to Miron Mulslic. It's not a name we're too familiar with, Ben. You're looking a bit stumped by that name. It's a big job for them to stay up, but that's the only target really, even though they've got this cup run.
I was a bit stumped by Danny Roll and Marty Cifuentes, and they turned out to do well. But you're totally right, and we had this, Simon, with the Wayne Rooney conversation of, what's the window of positions that Plymouth are actually going to finish in, and you would say good for Plymouth above the line, bad for Plymouth below the line. It's quite narrow. So I will admit the new manager's a new one on me, and the bar is not high. To go back to the Whittaker point, I think when they were coming up from League One, everyone would have said keep him at all costs. I've spoken to a fair few Argyle fans who would say, in terms of what you could get for him at return on investment, money against on the pitch, that maybe cash your chips in now. And by the way, that was the classic Morgan Whittaker goal, wasn't it? Off the right, keep going. Yep, seen that one before.
The Championship's Iron Robin almost, isn't he? He was linked with that move to Lazio, wasn't he? I think it was last summer, and it didn't materialise. Yeah, it's a difficult position to say that Plymouth should sell their key player this window, Gab. Where are you sitting on that?
Well, I think there's maybe a sense of regret that Plymouth Argyle didn't cash in on when Morgan Whittaker's value was about £20 million back in the summer, or possibly not far off that. Whereas at the moment, I think the fees bantered about are more like 10 million or 12 million. But I still think that in a Championship relegation battle, that kind of money could go a long way. Obviously, he's a brilliant player. He's shown that in previous campaigns. I think this season his form, he hasn't quite been at the level they were hoping for, and injuries have come into the equation as well. So yeah, he's a fantastic. If they keep him, I'm sure he could make a massive difference to their attempts to try and stay up. But if they can't, then I also think that there's a lot of money to be gained there.
I do think that producer Seb's just pointed out something, which is that Burnley are in the mix to sign Morgan Whittaker as well, which would be an interesting move. It seems like Burnley do this quite a lot in terms of just trying to poach the best Championship players on their way up.
Well, and it's exactly what happened for Scott Parker at Bournemouth in year 2 of their parachute payments. And funnily enough, they absolutely robbed the Championship of a load of players. I remember Kiefer Moore and Dembele, and they weren't actually that involved. It was the whole Celtic and Rangers thing. It was more the act of taking them off the other teams that was the kind of benefit of those deals. But it does smell very much like a parachute team going for promotion would like to throw Morgan Whittaker into the mix, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There are a few all-championship ties in the FA Cup this weekend as well, a couple of which caught the eye potentially for the wrong reasons in terms of attendance. Sheffield United versus Cardiff, I think there were 6,000 or 7,000 there. And then there was the Sunderland game as well, which they only had one stand open where they lost to Stoke. What do you make of this, Gab? Because it's a difficult one in terms of finances. We know the cup games aren't included with season tickets, but it does feel like there should be more interest than 6,000 Sheffield United fans turning up. I can forgive the Cardiff fans for not coming on a Thursday night, by the way, but from a home fan's point of view, what can we do about this?
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think if you look at second tier or below teams to have got to a final in the FA Cup, sort of modern history, I would suggest that it's pretty rare. Millwall did it, in 2004, didn't they, against Manchester United? If we're talking League Cup, Bradford City is a League Two team in 2013. But I think generally it's hard for lower league clubs to advance in domestic major competitions. And that's where I think for non-league clubs and League One and Two clubs, the FA Cup can be a huge source of revenue. I think for Premier League clubs, you've got an opportunity to win it. But I think for Championship clubs, I'm not sure quite where the motivation is in terms of what's the incentive.
Yeah, so Ben, for you as well, to add to that from Gab, because it is a tough thing. I think Sunderland had played Stoke twice in December as well, and then to get them again in the FA Cup, it just almost feels like typical. Coventry played Sheffield Wednesday, they've played them loads of times in the last 12 months. It's almost like cheap tickets isn't enough at the moment. It's almost like they're the ties that you can't really get that excited about. And is that where the FA Cup's almost lost value as well?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we can have a long conversation about the Premier League and how the TV money's gone up. We can have a conversation about the Champions League taking the attention of all of the Premier League clubs. Even, give free tickets to school kids. Well, you can't do that on a Thursday night in Sheffield for a 7 p.m. kickoff either, can you? So it's really difficult. And I listened to Chris Wilder's interviews before and after, and he was very clear about what was going to happen with the team selection. And if Sheffield United are promoted automatically, everyone will say that result is vindicated and the cup game was just a nuisance. They had to get ticked off. And that is where we are with the FA Cup. Interestingly enough, being a fan of a Premier League team now, it's very different. It's very different with the scheduling in the Premier League because you get the cup games on 3 Premier League weekends and you've got the 8 fewer games. So I think it is...
There's a bit more appeal for the FA Cup if you're a Premier League club, isn't there?
Yeah, it's very much a EFL problem for teams that are challenging for promotion, that it's a big nuisance.
You also have that with, from an Ipswich or a Premier League point of view, they spend this amount of money to have these massive squads. The team that
excellent point, yeah.
Ipswich put out against Bristol Rovers had Calvin Phillips and Jack Clark, and Jack Clark's player we spoke about as one of the Championship's best players in recent years, can't get many minutes in the Premier League. So I don't know what can be done to help these Championship teams where they're kind of in between this.
Mate, I think the toothpaste's out of the tube. I think we're too far gone on the FA Cup, sadly. And I am old enough to remember Ian Wright scoring twice and Paul Gascoigne scoring a free kick from miles out. So,
but yet last season I was at Wembley for a semi-final.
You're old enough to remember the Ricky George winner for Hereford against Newcastle.
Maybe.
But yet we talk about the FA Cup being in this manner for Championship teams. We nearly saw a Championship team in the FA Cup final last year as Coventry nearly beat Man United. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. It seems a difficult scenario. If you can have an easy draw and go deep into the competition, it becomes magical again. It becomes a chance to get to Wembley. It becomes a chance to beat one of the big boys. So on that manner, which Championship team this year could you see having a decent cup run, a la Coventry last year, getting to the last 8 or the last 4? Gab, let's start with you.
Well, I think Leeds have got a great opportunity because of the squad depth that they've got. But I also think that it's a competition that's maybe going to appeal to sides that are in that corner where there may be a little bit of a way off the playoff pace in the Championship, and they're maybe safe enough that they're not going to go down. And I think there's 1 or 2 that we've spoken about off air, like Blackburn and Stoke, that we think might be able to have a good run as well.
Ben, do you want to pick up on Blackburn?
Yeah, well, I'll go on Blackburn on the basis of it's tournament football, which suits more defensive-minded, pragmatic managers. And in John Eustace's own words, he sets teams up to be hard to beat. And I'm sure you'd agree, Mark Robins was a good tournament football manager as well in respect to that playoff semi-final against Middlesbrough, where they did a job on the best kind of attacking trio that the Championship had that season and just shut them out for 180 minutes. So maybe Blackburn can do something, although they don't fit Gab's criteria of a team they are in a playoff challenge, Blackburn.
I'll pick up on Stoke because I don't think they are in a playoff challenge, and they're obviously, I don't think, going to get relegated this season, but they've got the manager who got to a FA Cup semi-final last year now. They've got a squad that can score goals. I mean, Tom Cannon's a decent goal scorer up front, Kumas from Liverpool as well. I think they've got a lot of talent in that squad that just needs to be kind of functioned in the right way, which I believe Mark Robins can do. And also with the FA Cup at this stage, you need easy draws, and they've got, no disrespect to them, Cardiff at home in the next round, who have a bigger fish to fry in the Championship as well. So I think when you look at it like that and you look at the draw for the round, you have to say that Stoke are probably in with a decent chance of going quite far. And then it just takes another home tie, something like that. All of a sudden you're talking about a quarter-final, and Stoke haven't gone far in a cup in quite a while. I don't know the stats behind that, but it feels like they could go quite far. It's now time to talk about the manager changes in the Championship, because we've seen a fair few of them. We've touched on Plymouth already, might come back to that later. Since we last spoke, Gab, Rob Edwards has finally left Luton Town. Right or wrong decision for you?
I would say the right decision. That's no disrespect to Rob Edwards, who I think did a fantastic job there overall, getting them promoted in his first season, and they were competitive in the Premier League as they could have been. I think it just felt like in that final season, which didn't go as anyone at Luton would have hoped, but he just looked a little bit out of puff towards the end of his tenure, and sometimes it's one of those situations where, as good a job as he's done, it's probably time for fresh energy and new ideas to come into the role. But what I loved about the way, if you can love a managerial departure, is the fact that it seems so amicable. There's a really touching statement from Rob Edwards about working with the people he'd worked with. Similar thing, returned towards him from the likes of Gary Sweet and Nick Harford at Luton Town. So I think that was a nice way for that tenure to finish, even though this season has been disappointing for the Hatters.
I think that's what can kind of happen when you give a manager enough time this season. It didn't feel like a rash decision from Luton. We've seen the same patterns emerge from them this season. The results not turn around, Ben. For you, Matt Bloomfield is the 1 to 10 favourite to take over at Luton. That is incredibly short.
No chance.
No chance for you, Gab?
No, he's not going to leave Wycombe Wanderers, I don't think.
Why?
Because I think his legacy at Wycombe Wanderers is huge. So he started there in, I think, 2001 and played for Wycombe Wanderers for over 20 years, and then briefly went to Colchester to start his managerial career, and then before taking charge from Gareth Ainsworth when he went to QPR. And I think when you've built up that affinity with one football club, I think that's a really valuable thing, because what it gives you is a certain amount of security. I'm sure Matt wouldn't take his job at Wycombe for granted, but I think there is maybe a safety to it that Gareth Ainsworth's longevity provided. Of course, a little bit different under a Kazakhstani billionaire and an experienced chief football officer, so it's a little bit different. But also the affinity that he has with the fan base, and he's got an opportunity to try and win a promotion as manager of Wycombe Wanderers and take them to the Championship. That's a huge thing. I honestly don't believe that Matt Bloomfield right now would leave Wycombe Wanderers for any job in the world, because I think he wants to win promotion with Wycombe.
But with respect to Wycombe, and Ben, I'll get you in on this, they're not going to be a Premier League team anytime soon, whereas with Luton Town...
In the next 10 years, they could be.
Under Matt Bloomfield, potentially, it would be a very, very long-term project to achieve that. Whereas you look at Luton Town, next year, they're going to be a second-year parachute payment team still. And this season has been a complete anomaly in my eyes. So what an opportunity.
Well, that's the maths, isn't it? That there's 20 Premier League jobs, and you're probably, we can have a big rant about English managers or British Isles managers not getting chances. So you're probably not going to get 6 to 8 of those jobs. And the next best thing to one of the other 12 is a team at the top of the Championship. Like you say, one more year of parachute payments. I would kind of reconcile that financial discussion with the fact that Luton are going to be moving to a new stadium. And I think perhaps the reason. I mean, maybe they just wouldn't have spent massive anyway because they haven't, that's not been the way they've climbed up the pyramid. But I think that's kind of one of the reasons that there's not been this big spending, which means they've actually come down without players who are going to leave for 30, 40 million, which we've seen Leeds and Southampton and Leicester all be able to make those sales and just leverage that power at the top of the Championship. It does feel a bit of a shame with Edwards, and I agree with you about it kind of being nice and amicable, but there were times earlier in the season where I was like, Rob, stop apologising, fight back here, get this going again. That's the Luton way, isn't it? Being the underdog. And I just think things changed, huge when they won that penalty shootout at Wembley, and all of a sudden they've got money and they're not the underdogs anymore. So I think there's a lot that needs to be kind of funneled in that club back to getting Luton going on an upward trend again.
What I will say is it's an extremely attractive job for somebody, because what you want as a manager, especially with someone with a growing reputation, is real stable foundations. So you've got David Wilkinson, who's a very reliable owner of Luton Town, Gary Sweet, who I rate very highly as a CEO, Mick Harford, who's a very dependable figure. They absolutely love him at Luton. And they've also got some smart analytical people like Jay Sosick there as well. So I think Luton Town as a structural entity is a really attractive proposition, added to the fact that it's a very good squad and it might need a few tweaks in the next couple of windows, but they're not a million miles off. So I think it's a really attractive proposition for somebody to go in there and build something.
I agree.
And I talked quite a while ago about I thought Luton was the perfect job for Mark Robins. Obviously the timing hasn't quite matched up there. If you were picking a manager out of work you think would suit as Luton Town manager here, Gab, who would you go for?
I'm wondering about Des Buckingham,
Oh,
because
that would be very Luton, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Because this is somebody who started coaching in 2004. So although he's only 39 and quote unquote inexperienced, he's actually been coaching for 20 odd years. And I think that he's managed across the globe. He's managed Mumbai City. He managed Melbourne City. He's been successful everywhere he's been. He was bought by this City Football Group, and Oxford United were prepared to, in order to acquire his services, pay compensation to two different organisations, City Football Group and and Mumbai City as well. So that shows how highly they rated him. He went on to achieve success there, winning the League One playoffs with a brilliant individual game plan against Bolton Wanderers. I think he's made one or two mistakes in terms of maybe not giving himself a holiday after that and maybe pacing it a little bit. But I think the results he's delivered at Oxford United, if you look at it as a whole in the Championship, is pretty impressive on balance, even if on form he lost his job. So for me, I still think Des Buckingham is a coach with huge potential, and I think if you put him into the structure that we've talked about at Luton Town, then I think that could be a match made well.
Dare I mention the word Nathan Jones again to you, Ben?
You can mention it to me. Don't mention it to a certain cohort of the Luton fans. I don't know. Would Russ Martin be an interesting one? Promoted last season. Currently out of work. I like Gab's take that the very Luton thing would be to take an up and comer where even my reaction was like, oh yeah, that kind of works. But also, given what I said in the previous answer, maybe it just needs that knowledgeable kind of safe pair of been there, done it hands. But
they've got people like that upstairs, though, Ben. They've got really safe, reliable people upstairs who give. I would agree with you if it's a more chaos. So, for instance, Stoke needed that safe pair of hands like a Mark Robins, because he's got experience running a club as well as a team, and it's less about coaching ability and more about oversee it. I think
managing up. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas I think with Luton, I think the upwards part of it is pretty good.
That's a fair comment.
Actually, you put a talented coach in there, and I think it could work really nicely.
Yeah, I think Bloomfield takes it.
I'm not having that.
I just think we live in a cynical world. Gab and money talks.
You're sounding like Uncle Bryn there, Simon.
he jumped from Colchester fairly quickly.
No, but that's different.
No, you can't say no to that. That is an objective fact. He jumped from Colchester very quickly.
All right, I'm not arguing. I'm not disputing the fact, but I think his relationship with Wycombe Wanderers is extremely significant. I think it'd be very difficult at this stage of the season as well. It'd be one thing if he's just won promotion with Wycombe Wanderers and the Luton Town, but you've got a chance in the next 4 months to try and win promotion with the club that you've had over 2 decades worth of association with. Not a chance he's going to give that up. Not a chance.
We will wait and see.
Are we clear on what Gab thinks about that?
We will wait and see. It's an interesting point. Looking at the stats in the bottom half of the table this season, we were counting them up before we started recording. I think 11 teams in total have changed.
11
managers.
Changes, 10 teams have changed with Stoke changing twice.
There you go. Thank you for that, Ben. But in the bottom half of the table, only Portsmouth, Derby and QPR haven't changed their manager this term. I mean, Ben, credit to those three, right, for kind of sticking with their man, and it seems to be paying off now.
Yeah, and it's the teams that 2 of them got promoted last season, and QPR, zoomed up the table in the second half of the season. So it's managers with credit in the bank, and we joke. You can probably wind back to our conversation in the summer where we probably guessed 12, 14 managerial changes. That's just the deal in the Championship, and it almost feels mad that you're saying the QPR giving a manager time that was hired, 18 months ago, probably even
12 months ago.
Yeah,
maybe.
probably even less than that. But if you give me I don't know what it is, but if you give me the average length, you're probably right. They have given him time.
Yeah, from the bottom of the league and the place they were in, I think they've done well to not kind of cave in to the pressure and climb the table. There is the only team in the top half of the table to change manager, not out of choice. Obviously, Carlos Corberán leaving West Brom. What are your thoughts on West Brom and this manager change? It's difficult when a manager leaves when you don't really want him to, and he's valued so highly, Ben, but they're still in with a chance of the playoffs, aren't they?
Yeah, I was surprised because I think it went through on Christmas Eve, and
Merry Christmas.
Interviews are coming out on Christmas Day. I would think Corberán out of West Brom is, if not the top, certainly in the top 3 clubs in the Championship where losing the manager's a big deal, where we've discussed before, West Brom, they're always challenging in the playoffs, and can you add 3 or 4 places on just because of the good work the manager's done? I think whenever you watch a West Brom game on TV, the commentators will always say, they're very experienced, they're very powerful, they're maybe a little bit older than other teams. So there's work that needs doing, and we've seen the example of Slot at Liverpool, where you very carefully don't change very much, and I would suggest there's extremely solid pattern of play, probably muscle memory of those players is very strong. So I think there's maybe an argument that Raphael Vicky, if and when he is confirmed, needs to kind of ride this season out and let a lot of the good work that Carlos Corberán has already done take him through to the end of the season. And my take, looking below the top 6, is they're a good... will you tell me who's going to overtake them?
I think it looks to be on paper a good appointment. I think it speaks to the strength of the Championship. Again, they can appeal to someone like Raphael Vicky, who's won titles in the past, managed in Europe as well, I think.
Swiss Super League he's won, I think, hasn't he?
Yeah, indeed. And he's managed some big clubs in Switzerland and Basel included. So I think if you're looking at that for an appointment, it seems sensible. And you're right, the components are there. And we've seen West Brom win a lot of games this season. Not a lot needs to change for them to finish in the playoffs. So I'm kind of excited about it from that point of view.
Yeah, I think Ben makes a great point about not sort of reinventing the wheel, and it's possibly why I would have been apprehensive about them appointing Luke Williams, who is another sort of name in the frame, because as much as I rate Luke Williams, have done for a long time as an in-possession coach, I think that you've got to maintain that solidity and keep that in place for the remainder of the season and make sure they've got that balance. And certainly if they got up into the Premier League, it's all about, can you create enough chances and give the opposition enough to think about while still having that really solid defensive base? And that's what West Brom have got to try and find. So really curious to see what we'll expect from Raphael Vicky.
Excellent stuff. We've got a couple of midweek fixtures to look forward to this week, and then we'll preview some of the weekend fixtures as well. But there's a big game on Tuesday night at the bottom of the table. Plymouth versus Oxford United. Ben, I'll come to you first on this one. It's the new manager's first game in charge. Gary Rowett's had a very good start to life at Oxford. 3 wins in the last 4 for them. I mean, this is kind of a massive game at the bottom also, to mention Oxford went out of the cup at the weekend. Plymouth favourites, Oxford favourites. Where are you sitting on this one?
There's so many components, isn't there? You've got one manager on the new manager bounce of all new manager bounces. You've got the home team hoping to get a new manager bounce, which they did last season, and they kind of got, in the FA Cup as well at the weekend. You've got the geographical angle of Plymouth always doing better at home than they do away. But if I know Gary Rowett, he's going to be saying to the Oxford players this weekend, you can tick off a team here. If you go there and beat them, they ain't catching you. That's going to be his pitch. And all the pressure, therefore, falls on Plymouth. They're the ones chasing. But it's hard for me not to make Argyle favourites in a home game, because it just always is the way. And we don't know whether we're going to be sat here at the end of the season. And this 10 points in 4 games for Gary Rowett, is that going to be a big splurge of points that is an outlier in a new manager bounce? Or are they going to keep trucking? We're going to find out more, aren't we?
It kind of makes the decision to swap Buckingham for Rowett worth it, though, even if it's just this 10 points in 4 games bounce, because that might be all they need, Gab.
Sure. I think one advantage that Gary Rowett has is that he's been studying the Championship for the last 11 years, and that's a massive advantage that I think he has in terms of probably player knowledge and being able to be up and running straight away as an in-season appointment. I do see that as a massive advantage, because you don't need as much time to study the opposition because you kind of know the players. And that's where I would maybe give Oxford... The other thing as well is I think he can implement his ideas very quickly. I've seen it as a Birmingham fan, as he was an in-season appointment there, did it at Millwall as well. Immediately there's solidity about his teams, and it doesn't take long to implement out-possession stuff. I think with Muslich, he's also an out-possession coach, but from somebody I spoke to who's a coach in the game, rates Muslich very highly as a pressing coach, and obviously also sort of primarily out of possession, but also... I think if you're an extreme high pressing coach, you've also got to make sure that you've got the players to be able to do that.
And you've also got to make sure you've got a few months to set that all up.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm curious to see whether Muslich can have that instant impact and get that going straight away. So if I was to lean towards prediction, I would maybe actually go for a 1-0 Oxford, because I think that Muslich might need a bit of time to settle in, both in terms of implementing this extreme pressing identity and also knowing the players, whereas Gary Rowett hasn't needed that time to be up and running, and he's a pretty safe pair of hands.
If I had to push you for a score prediction, Ben?
I'll just flip his on its head for fun. I'll go for the new manager bounce then. 1-0 Plymouth, why not?
To cover all bases, I'll go for a 1-1.
Excellent. We've done this before.
I think, to be honest, it's a game in which both teams need not to lose. I know Plymouth do need to start making up ground, but I think they would both probably be satisfied not to lose ground to the other at this stage of the season, especially with how they're both playing and the new manager in at Plymouth as well. Right, let's move on to the weekend and the other end of the table. Friday night, Gab, Burnley versus Sunderland. I mean... It's 2nd versus 4th. There's only 2 points between them right now. 2 teams right in contention for the top 2 places.
I'm so excited for this game, Simon. I think you've got to look at this. We mention it every week, don't we? This phenomenal defensive record that Burnley have got, the shot-stopping ability of James Trafford, the partnership of Maxime Estev and CJ Egan-Riley. Even Bashir Humphreys, the left back, has been rock solid, put in a lovely delivery, didn't he, the other week? So yeah, Burnley have been rock solid, but with Sunderland bringing in Enzo Lafy on loan, who I know is extremely highly rated from people that I've spoken to who've maybe studied the leagues abroad, and apparently had a good debut against Stoke as well. I'm really excited about that. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that one plays out. It's going to be a corker, I think.
Thanks for mentioning Enzo Lafy, because obviously the transfer window is open, and this signing feels almost like Ruben Neves to Wolves in the Championship, kind of millions of pounds. Not as big a name, obviously, but sometimes these transfers happen in the Championship, and you think, wow, what a league we're in, where a club can go and do something like this, Ben.
We've spoken about this before, though, about English football, where I can't remember who was it, speaking about the European transfer market, was waiting for, it was like Juventus were waiting for Bournemouth to do a deal. That's where we are now, where clubs in the Championship, particularly, we always mention parachute payments, but particularly the ones with that, extra TV payment coming in, are able to do more business and bigger deals than a lot of the other top leagues. The game, I don't want to pour water on it, but not only have you got a team, as Gab says, that have got an ungodly defensive record, but when I've seen Sunderland play away, they're really nicely set up to stop teams as well, and be nice and compact, and then spring out. So it could be a moment, let's just say, that wins this game.
Is it obvious who's going to get that moment for you, Gab? You've got to back your team, haven't you?
1-0 Sunderland, I think.
Are you going to do it? But Ben, are you going to go 1-0 Burnley?
Well, and the beautiful man that I fell in love with, Jeremy Sarmiento, maybe to score the goal, and give me some memories of last season. But yeah, it does feel like we are under 1.5 goals for this game, doesn't it?
It's very interesting. I mean, in terms of the impact on the promotion race, do we think the winner of this game, obviously it sounds obvious to say, do they take a massive step forward into one of those automatic promotion places? It's a 6-pointer, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think earlier in the season, we've both expressed some doubt about Burnley from a sustainability point of view, but I think while I still feel there's a possibility that their rate of chance creation isn't at the level that they might need it to be, and there is a possibility that some of those fine margins maybe flip the other way in the second half of the season, I certainly think they're in a great position to finish in the top 6, and probably you're starting to feel like, because they've done it for over half a season now, you've got to trust it a little bit more. But yeah, massive opportunity for both teams, I think.
And what it could do, Simon, is I'm personally of the view that the top 3 now is the top 3, and Sunderland are having an amazing season.
No.
What it will do is all the Sunderland fans that say to me, come on, Ben, we can do this, we can get in the top 2. Sunderland, go there and win, will start changing the minds of people like me who think, it's going to be parachute 1, 2, 3 again. Could make a statement if they go there and win.
I'd love just for the Championship for them to do it. I really would, because I think if we could get into a dangerous position where it's the parachute teams just going up and down every season, so we need to have teams that break that up.
But look at Sunderland's midfield though, is what I would say, because you've got Dan Neil. You've got Joe Bellingham, who's one of the most prodigious talents in, world football, along with Chris Rigg, who you could say the same about. You've got Enzo Lafay, who we've talked about as this incredible signing for Sunderland. You've got Alan Brown, who's been an extremely reliable, tenacious midfielder in the Championship over the last few years. It's like their midfield option is insane. So I've got a feeling that Joe Bellingham's going to run the show at Turf Moor, and maybe Lafay as well. So I've got a feeling that those two are going to do it.
Good battle in the dugout as well, because there's always a lot of scepticism about Scott Parker, which we won't go into because that's a long conversation. But Regis Lebris has been fantastic this season, and can he go there and do a number on him?
He's proved me wrong, Parker. I know we talked about it a little bit. I thought Burnley would be far worse off, but their defensive record speaks for itself, and it's going to put them in the promotion mix.
Do you think, though, that I think Sunderland are a bit closer to the middle in terms of that spectrum, where they've got that solidity, they can create, a bit like what we've spoken about with West Brom. I think they're able to play games in different ways, and I don't quite know if Burnley have got, I think they're so reliant on that defensive solidity, but if they don't... I think creating chances is something that you can rely on to repeat. Whereas not conceding goals, you're a little bit reliant on Trafford continuing to make brilliant saves, or shots from outside the box not sort of flying in the odd time. Because I don't think you're going to continue to concede. The sort of 9 goals they've conceded all season.
One every 3 games, right?
Which is just phenomenal. I don't think they're going to continue that, which stands to reason that they've got to start creating a few more chances, just because they've set unrealistically high standards for themselves defensively. That I don't think they're going to sustain for 46 games.
I think they can suffocate games. That's when I watch Burnley games, I just don't think the other team really has a sniff. It's not like Trafford's making loads and loads of saves or anything. They have that level of control. And
Simon as well, if I can bring up Zian Fleming, whose job at Millwall was to just bust XG and, will defend and keep a clean sheet, you score from outside the box. there's a lot of goals going in for Fleming now as well.
But
So
4 shots at Blackburn though. And I mean, surely they're going to have some games where they only have 3 or 4 shots and
law
they
of
don't
averages
score.
would say so, but law of averages would have said Ipswich wouldn't have finished second last year as well. So the championship will make a fool of us at all times, won't it?
Fleming's a Burnley legend now after what he did at Ewood Park with the corner flag and his shirt running in front of the away end. So we'll see how that develops. A massive game. Make sure you tune in for that one. And the other game we're going to preview this weekend has to be Cardiff versus Swansea, the South Wales derby, Saturday lunchtime, Gab. Cardiff do have a midweek game as well, but clearly in relegation trouble this season and haven't had the best of this derby.
Yeah, I think certainly when Swansea were under Russell Martin, they had a great record against them. Obviously under Bullitt, Cardiff won it last season against Michael Duff. But I think it's the kind of game that Cardiff could need to sort of revitalise their season. If they could win a derby and create that sort of electricity at the Cardiff City Stadium, then that could be the sort of thing that sort of galvanises them. They did get a brilliant win at Watford recently, which could help. I think there's been some question marks about them from a fitness point of view this season, which is why they are my corner of concern this week. But I think it's important that they both get a positive result in the derby, but also recruit well, because I think that squad needs some fresh energy.
In terms of derbies in the Championship, I mean, it doesn't really get much bigger than this one, does it, Ben? No, there's bubbles for the fans go into games. They don't go near each other. They properly hate each other. It's what we love to see, isn't it?
Oh yeah, we love to see it, but obviously the right side of the line. But yeah, I think to bring up something that we spoke about earlier in the show, I think those big links for Luke Williams to leave the post and go to West Brom maybe a few weeks ago. I don't know how disruptive they were, and what a great way to get rid of any sense of disruption. Go and beat your fiercest rivals in their own backyard.
I'm going to have to push you both for a score prediction on this one, Gab. Let's start with you.
1-1.
Just go for something silly. 3-2 Swansea. How about that?
I'll go 3-0 Swansea.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. I just have a lot of concerns about Cardiff this season, which brings us nicely on, Gab, to your corner of concern, because they are the team you're worried about this season. Specifically, what are you worried about with Cardiff?
Yeah, I think I look at the impact Gary Rowett has made at Oxford. I look at the appointment of Mark Robbins at Stoke. These are sort of experienced Championship managers, and not to say that you definitely need experience, because we've seen last season that Marty Cifuentes and Danny Röhl had been able to make great impacts at Sheffield Wednesday and at QPR. But I think, I'm a little bit wondering whether Omar Rita, with very little sort of coaching, with very little managerial experience, other than a brief stint at Leyton Orient for a couple of games, about 8 years ago, doesn't have a huge amount. So I'm a little bit worried about Cardiff. And also, just generally in terms of the relegation battle, it feels like there's lots of teams. I think it's going to be a very high points tally in terms of the Championship relegation battle this year. I don't even know that 50 points is going to be enough to keep you up this year. So, and I think there's about 10 teams that could go down. So, I'm a little bit worried about there not being enough. There's not 3 teams that you would clearly say, yep, Cardiff have a great chance of finishing above them.
For you, Ben, how much does experience play a part at the bottom of the Championship in terms of managers as well? Because I take on board what Gab's saying, and it feels like the other teams at the bottom, and we talk about Oxford, have really strengthened and got that boost, whereas Cardiff had that boost earlier in the season, but it's kind of faded away now, right?
I think an issue for teams down there as well is it would seem fairly logical that Hull and Stoke and Luton are all probably going to be a few places higher than they are right now, and maybe clear out that bottom 6, and then the likes of Oxford and Preston, and have had good runs. If they've regressed slightly and we just get a nice little trend from those 3 teams I've just mentioned, then your bottom 6 starts to solidify, doesn't it? But yeah, Cardiff as well. We always worry about Mr. Tan, and the Cardiff fans will always tell me, never give the managers any players, and you would worry about other teams being able to steal a march on Cardiff as opposed to necessarily, Cardiff kind of flatlining and other teams, as you say, make a change or something happens, So I can see why they're in the corner of concern, yeah.
And also, it's the January transfer window, and we've spoken about Plymouth making a managerial change. I think they're in the running to bring a few new players in. It never feels like Cardiff are going to go out and, get that difference maker to keep them in the league. So that's something I'm slightly concerned about. Would you agree with that as well, Will?
Yeah, I also think that I don't think it's a particularly well-run club on a day-to-day basis that would kind of, in terms of operationally and recruitment, that I would probably question as well. They did manage to have a good one-off season last year under Errol Bullitt, but generally speaking, they've been sort of languishing just above the relegation zone in the Championship for a few years now. And I think that when clubs get into that sort of pattern, it can be quite an ominous sign for the future. So for me, I think Cardiff City are going to need new ownership before they can really move forward.
Sounds right to me. Gab, onto your Championship treble, and this is for the weekend, that's correct.
Yeah, I think Sheffield United might beat Norwich. I think Luton might beat Preston North End, and I think West Brom beat Stoke. Really intrigued to see whether Sheffield United can lift their performance levels up. They've had one or two free weeks, if you like, in terms of not having a game in midweek, and I think that might help them because during the festive period they looked a little bit fatigued. So I think that, hopefully they can revitalise themselves and get a few key players back from injury.
A quick conversation actually about Norwich, because Borgestein suspended for 6 matches now. Josh Sargent still out injured. It felt like the work Johannes Hoff-Thurup was doing and the good work he's done. He's also faced so many difficulties. In the summer when he came in, there was the John Rowe issue where he was on the way out. Ben, what's your thoughts on Norwich right now?
Well, I think we're going to see an arrival or two, and it looks on brand with what they've done already, European market and quite nice chunky fees. And what you've got to say about Norwich always is fair play, the amount of money, though, that club raises, from transfers. I was kind of in your boat thinking about Saints. You're missing your best player who's been carrying you for 6 games, but the numbers have actually, you talk about unsustainable. He was in ridiculous form, and the numbers have actually dropped off a little since then. But I think you've mentioned the key guy. Everyone probably imagines if Sargent plays 38 games for Norwich, he's going to be around the 20 goal mark. So if they can get him back, Saints firing again, something new from the transfer window, there's definitely something there. And what we all know about Norwich is if they get a sniff of the playoffs or promotion, they'll be in and around it, won't they?
I think that it's interesting you mentioned there that Borgestein's numbers have dropped off and Sargent's been injured. I think there's an overlap there. I don't think it's a coincidence because for me, Josh Sargent, as much as he can score some goals, I think that actually his main strength is his ability to bring others into play, his link-up play, his work rate. And I think he does a great job of creating space for Josh Sargent and for Borgestein to really get those goal-scoring opportunities. So I think they've got a great understanding. And I think when you take one away, you probably limit the impact of the other.
We'll see how your Championship treble does this weekend. And my final question to you this week is, obviously the FA Cup is often a stage for lower league stars to shine. Are there any players who caught your eye this season or this week, or who you could really make a step up into the Premier League? Gab, are you going to pick a Sunderland player again there?
I was going to say Jazz Singh of Tamworth, but probably not for the Premier League. Sorry, Jazz.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But I interpreted the question slightly differently. But I think Jazz Singh, I used to watch him back in the day for Solihull Moors, and I always thought he was a good non-league goalkeeper. Did well for Tamworth, against Tottenham. Harry Burgoyne as well of Morecambe as well. So a couple of good goalkeepers impressing in the lower leagues. Burgoyne against Chelsea, obviously, and Singh against Tottenham.
Absolutely. Ben, any names for you?
There was no Tim Bazaglo, Ronnie Radford figure, was there, this weekend? We've already mentioned 2 of the guys who really put themselves in the shop window. Matt Bloomfield beating Portsmouth with Wycombe.
He's in the club shop window at Wycombe Wanderers, Ben.
His final win as Wycombe boss.
Don't start him again. Oh my God. No, but you're having a great season and you go and beat a team from I know there's not that many places between them in the actual pyramid. Morgan Whittaker, we already mentioned, go away to Brentford. I saw the question on the format if I can break the fourth wall a little bit when we were coming in, and I sort of looked up the Doncaster keeper. He saved the decisive penalty. He's on loan from Chelsea, so that doesn't quite work. And maybe to Gab, Mitchell, the Exeter guy, who's very vocal on Twitter. I think he's been at Manchester United. Could he find his way back? He was at Blackpool for a while, wasn't he?
Possibly, yeah.
Did he find his way back up the ladder?
Possibly. Well, he's versatile, Dimitri Mitchell, so he can play as a wing-back or in one of those attacking midfield spots. The other one for Exeter who really impressed me was Caleb Watts, because he was quite highly rated, I think, at Southampton's academy. What I really like about him is that he's very agile, so he can kind of spin his opponent and then create and sort of open the game up for his team. So I think Caleb Watts could be due some good form, and maybe he can make his way up the pyramid as well.
Excellent stuff, Gab. And of course, Ben, we have to mention Cov versus Ipswich drawn in the next round. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel a darn sight more relaxed than a game you'll remember from the second last game of last season. A torturous win for Ipswich with Coventry tiring. And honestly, that's a very special game for a lot of Ipswich fans, because if you look at the pictures of Kieran McKenna and Mark Ashton afterwards, that was the moment where they kind of knew, I think we've done it. And they knew they were going to beat Huddersfield on the last day of the season, who were already down, other than winning 20-0 if I remember, or something like that. So it's a great matchup. Honestly, it's a bit of an awkward one for Ipswich, because an Ipswich 1B or 1C team could lose to a Coventry 1 team with a full CBS stadium. So I hope to be there, and it should be a really good cup tie.
You worried about Mason Clark, Ben?
He's got to get back fit first. We'll see if he makes it. Yeah, right, I think he should be back on.
It's really difficult, not to sound arrogant, being a fan of a Premier League team now that's just spent 100 million quid on your squad. Your entire concern is, what is the 11 you're gonna be putting out, and how much churn and how much will the patterns of play kind of drop. But we hope that the professor has got the pattern of play drilled into every member of that squad, and they can go to Coventry and get the win.
Exactly. When you're a Premier League team that's done what you've done, as you say, you could make 5, 6, 7 changes and still have the majority of the team that won promotion from the Championship out on the field last season. So that's for another day. We'll look forward to that. Thank you very much, Ben and Gab, for joining me this week. Make sure you like and subscribe. Get in the comments down below your thoughts as well. But that's all from us on The Sportsman Untitled, and we'll see you next week.